Okay. Thank you very much, Father Ted. In the name of our Dean and the Association of Anglophone African Students of Canon Law, Angelicum, I welcome you as special guests and honorable colleagues on the field of canon law to our second annual conference on the theme, the protection of minors in the church in Africa. It is my prayer that this topic will bring us fresh insights and new ways to protect our minors in Africa. I wish all of us a fruitful conference, and I thank you all. May God bless you as you listen. And I call on the moderator, Father Thaddeus, to introduce the guest speaker to us. Thank you.
Thank you, dear sister. I now read the citation of our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is Reverend Father Chidebere Obiodo from Okigwe Diocese. Father Chidebere Obiodo is of the Catholic Diocese of Okigwe, Nigeria. He was born on the 3rd September 1986. He attended St. Peter's Minor Seminary, Okigwe, and All Saints Major Seminary, Ekpoma, Edo State, where he obtained his bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of Benin, Nigeria, and in theology from Pontifical Urbaniana University, Rome. Father Chidebere was ordained a priest on 26 September 2013 at Okigwe. After his ordination, he served as the vice principal of Mercy Gears High School, Okigwe, and later as the assistant financial administrator of Okigwe Diocese. He also served as the first diocesan chaplain of the National Association of Catholic Corpers, NACC. Apart from his bachelor's degree, he has a postgraduate diploma in education from Abia State University, Nigeria, and a master's degree in peace studies and conflict resolution from the National Open University. From the National Open University of Nigeria. He has another master's degree in religion in contemporary society from King's College, London, and a licentiate in canon law from St. Pius X Faculty of Canon Law, Venice, Italy. He has a doctorate in canon law from the Pontifical Lateran University, Rome, writing on the thesis, The Church in Nigeria at the Service of Victims of Sexual Abuse perpetrated by church personnel in the light of canonical norms. Father Chidebere has a diploma in marriage jurisprudence and praxis from St. Pius X Faculty of Canon Law, Venice, and has completed programs in child exploitation, child protection, online safety, and safeguarding adults. While in Italy, he served as the chaplain of the Nigerian community at the Diocese of Vicenza, Italy. He also did a year internship at the Chancery of the Diocese of Vicenza and the Triveneto Ecclesiastical Marriage Tribunal. Father Chidi is an associate of King's College London, AKC, and the founder of the History and Culture of the Peoples of Okigwe Diocese, a digital library which collects contents on the history and culture of the communities within Okigwe Diocese. He is also a co-founder of Priest Hearts Volunteer Group, Okigwe Diocese, a group of priests focusing on promoting the health of priests in Okigwe Diocese through research. He lectures in canon law, religion, and spiritual theology at Seat of Wisdom Seminary, Owerri. Imo State, Nigeria. He runs the blog Existential Theology, which since July 2021 has presented weekly reflections on the Catholic Church in Nigeria in contemporary society based on a new existential approach to theology. He has published 3 books and written several articles in journals. Father Chidi plays the keyboard, saxophone, and recorder. He loves playing tennis. My dear friends, join me to welcome our distinguished speaker, Father Chidebere Obiodo, to come and do justice to the topic, the protection of minors in the church in Africa, a reflection of Canon 1398. Dear Father, you are welcome.
Thank you. I have a slide, so I think I'll need to
Okay, let me allow you to share it from my angle. You can share it now.
Okay. I hope you can see that.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay. So, good evening, all, from wherever you're listening to me. And good afternoon for those who are on the other side of the pond. The topic presented to me is on the protection of minors in the church in Africa, a canonical reflection on Canon 1398. I decided to maintain the topic and then say what I wanted to say within the context of the topic given to me, because the topic is a little bit having 2 things at the same time, which makes it a bit complex. So the work is divided into 5 sections: the introduction, the incidence of sexual abuse in Africa, and an overview of the canonical delict of sexual abuse, safeguarding victims of sexual abuse in the church in Africa, and then the conclusion. So regarding the introduction, so we hear 2 terms which are sometimes used whenever we talk about sexual abuse: protection and safeguarding. And so the topic I have is protection. But why the 2 are connected with the care of victims of sexual abuse and in handling cases of sexual abuse, there is a subtle difference between these 2 terms, protection and safeguarding. So while protection focuses on dealing with cases where victims are at risk of experiencing abuse and adopting reactive measures to protect them, safeguarding is a proactive approach and involves putting measures in place to prevent victims from being in harm's way in the first place. So there are 2 similar but subtly different terms regarding care for sexual abuse victims. And then on the other hand, we have Canon 1398, which does not focus on care for abuse of abuse victims. Instead, as part of Book 2, as part 2 of Book 6, which is on penal law, it focuses on the particular offenses and penalties established for the delicts of sexual abuse. So we're having 2: safeguarding, protecting of minors in the church in Africa, and then a canonical reflection. So on the first part, the word protection is limited. And then on the other hand, reflection on Canon 1398 does not involve all circumstances of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. It only focuses on, uses the term victims, uses the term minors, those who habitually have the imperfect use of reason, and those to whom the law recognizes equal protection. So it goes beyond Canon 1398, and then protection of minors goes beyond the word protection. So in my paper, I try to look at the two terms, two competing interests here. Protection of minors, which, as you will see in the course of the work, is more, I use the word safeguarding more, and then I'm doing an overview of the canonical delict of sexual abuse, which will now include all other documents, Sacramentis Tutela, Vox Exis Lus Mundi, and then, of course, Canon 1395 as well. So as we're going to see that in the context of the work. The next slide is the incidence. So we cannot talk about sexual abuse in Africa without forms of sexual abuse in Africa. Does it exist? Because often we hear cases on TV about things happening in the Western world and few cases in Africa. So I struggled to find the study. I really searched, but couldn't find. So here we have a 2009 study from the University of Barcelona, which analyzed studies across 22 countries around the world. It estimates that 34.4% of child sexual abuse, so child sexual abuse, which means it excludes sexual abuse when the victims are no longer below the age of 18. So, but this is only for minors. So, which happened in Africa. So with South Africa having the highest prevalence for both men and women. So other African countries examined Morocco and Tanzania. So we have about 54 countries in Africa. So this is just statistics based on 3 countries in Africa. So the report also from this study in Barcelona shows that Europe had the lowest prevalence rates at 9.2, while America and Asia had prevalence rates between 10.1% and 23.9%. Of course, this does not reflect the true African situation, and it's not up to date. Clearly, it's not up to date. Reliable and up-to-date data are only found at the national level. Sadly, there is none, which you can see for all countries, let alone one done for the whole continent. But something interesting here is while the prevalence rate based on the study from the University of Barcelona is 34.4% for Africa, ironically, we have fewer reported cases, unlike in other continents with a lower prevalence rate. So why do we have very few cases recorded in the church in Africa and recorded in Africa? So the peculiarities of the African society provide some explanation. So I have 8 points here, which is the next slide. So there are peculiarities of the African society. So these peculiarities occur in 2 ways. First, it shows the reason why there is sexual abuse, and then it shows why cases are not reported. So because whenever we talk about sexual abuse, there are always these 2 dimensions. Does it exist? And then are the cases reported? Then we can still add other layers. What has been done when cases are reported? So the first peculiarity of African societies, which I believe cuts across all parts of Africa, is patriarchy and the status of the child. So African societies are patriarchal. Women are still subjugated and have limited rights in many countries of Africa. So that subjugal role undermines their ability and confidence to report cases of sexual abuse. And it also makes them more susceptible or vulnerable to abuse cases. We also have status of the child, who children are also considered lower members of society, not accorded the full rights. So, and we have cases of child labor, child exploitation, very common. So these 2 points on this number 1 are peculiarities that influence the prevalence of sexual abuse in Africa. Number 2, respect for elders. So African culture emphasizes on respect. And the whole issue of sexual abuse has to do with a situation of someone who occupies the role of authority, or someone who is influential or who can influence the other person to accept to be a victim of sexual abuse, or someone who takes an advantage of the other person. So in many cases, seniors, elders exploit, abuse victims. But because of elders, will they agree that this man or this woman did this, which is often mostly in case of men, because elders are respected in society. So if they abuse someone, the person finds it difficult, extremely difficult, to report because we're already inhibited by culture, which emphasizes respect for these elders. 3, protection of family honor. So African societies are run according to families. Marriages are run according to families, not basically the individuals. So anything that will undermine the collective image of the family, families tend to protect it and put it off. So if a sexual abuse case happens, families might prefer not to report so that they do not bring dishonor to the family name. So they try to hide it or try don't report. Let us just sort it out. And if it happens within the family, when a member of the family abuses another member of the family, they sort it out within themselves to ensure that the family name is protected. 4, fear of stigma. So fear of stigma and threats to marriage. So interest in doing my research for my doctorate, I discovered that also that young boys are also abused gravely, and they find it difficult to report because men feel that they should be strong enough. The boys felt that they should be strong enough to resist abuse. So a boy wouldn't want to be identified as a sexual abuse victim because it undermines his masculinity. And so we have that fear on part of men, and then of course of women who will be considered, this girl has been abused, which leads to the next point, threat to marriage. So if one is considered to be a victim of sexual abuse, then it undermines the girl's ability to get married because people say, no, this girl, no, I know Figo, I can't move on with this girl because she has been married, she has been abused. So they do not report. The families and people involved try to shut it down. The 5th one, the judiciary system and the disregard for the rule of law. So we know many countries in Africa run 3 systems, like Nigeria run 3 systems, which is called legal pluralism. So we have customary law, Islamic law, and statutory law, which you can say is the civil law. So the judiciary system has each legal system has different methodology, jurisprudence, and ways of evaluating sexual. So in customary law, who is a minor varies from who is a minor in Islamic law. So the judicial system also varies in that context. So the penalties as well also vary. So the judiciary systems in Nigeria, Africa are overstretched and then poorly funded, and of course, they are corrupt. So we're also having the issue of you have to prove, the burden of proving that an abuse has happened is so much that if you don't have sufficient proof, you might not be able to say. Because if you go to the case, if you take the case to court, you have to prove that the person abused you. And most abuse cases happen when no one is there. So based on other peculiarities of the society, how do you justify, how do you explain that this is what happened? And your witness is going to agree that it was actually what happened. So it's quite burdensome on that part. And of course, there is disregard for the rule of law. So if I report a case to the police and to the government, nothing is being done. So why should I now report again? Because I'm seeing that the politicians and the wealthy in the society disregard the rule of law because they have the cover and the protection. So people who abuse do not report, so that because they are not sure they are going to get justice. So no need activating that route if one is unsure of getting justice. Then spirituality of forgiveness, this one might be interesting, but with Africa, we believe that we should forgive the person who has offended us. So there's also this element of Christianity in it. So the first part is people believe that once someone has done something, karma will meet the person later on. So no need disturbing myself. Whatever this person did, he's going to suffer for it in the next life, or karma is going to catch up with him. So no need taking action immediately. So we tend to be docile to issues like this because we believe karma will take care of it in the future. And then we also believe that we should forgive those who offend us. So during my research, I discovered that cases people say, Jesus Christ said we should forgive those who offend us. So let us try to forgive them. So they try to keep quiet because of this spirituality of forgiveness. 7, the practice of spiritual cleansing. So this stems from our traditional religion and it's still happening today in Africa. Many forms of healing and spiritual cleansing, which involves bathing people in the water, body anointing. So these to prevent, to heal, or to ward off spiritual attacks. So this, when you're having a situation where somebody is anointed, the whole body is anointed, then you know that the person being anointed is prone to abuse. In my work, there are cases of people who were abused in the context of spiritual deliverance. And so this practice of spiritual cleansing also enables sexual abuse to go on in Africa. So we have the eighth one, number 8, which is basically I took from the Bishops' Conference of Nigeria, which they argue, wherein the bishops argue that the breakdown of family values and communal living undermines the specific bonds of apostolic charity, ministry, and fraternity, which unites a priest with other members of the presbyterium. So this situation creates a favorable condition for sexual abuse. And of course, the bishops also maintain that the Nigerian media is largely and relatively friendly towards mainline churches. So once it concerns the mainline churches, they tend to the media tries to manage the information, which also, unfortunately, is a protection as well. So I go to the next point. Having understood these 8 points, which influences the peculiarities which influences the incidence of sexual abuse in Africa and reporting, I go to the incidents. So I struggle to find stories as well, like I just said at the beginning. So we have here Bishop Cornelius Shilda, who was a bishop in Kenya, who was accused of molesting a boy while serving as a priest. So he stepped down in 2009, citing health reasons. So we have another case of Father Christopher Cunningham, a British priest who was discovered to have abused school children in Tanzania in the 1960s. So it's interesting that this information was discovered after his death in 2010, after a BBC commentary. So it was after a BBC commentary that the issue came up. So then I have another one in between 2003 and 2018, 35 cases of clergy sexual abuse were reported in South Africa. So 3 of the priests were defrocked or dismissed from the clerical state in 2018. So unlike in some countries in the West, no comprehensive nationwide study has been done on the incidence of sexual abuse in any African country. I've not heard. So if someone knows that has been done in his or her country, I will be interested to see that document. But so far, I have not seen any. It's interesting here to read to you what the Bishops' Conference of Nigeria said, if you can see it on the slide as well. The Bishops' Conference of Nigeria says, we know that cases like these, talking about sexual abuse, abound, only that victims of sexual abuse, out of shame and the desire to safeguard their honor and dignity, wallow in pains for years. Proper research and study will likely reveal the many unspoken cases of abuse of vulnerable adults than cases of sexual abuse of minors. Our culture nurtures this culture of silence, and this in no small way portends great danger. So the bishops have confirmed that if you invest really, you are going to see more. While conducting my research as well, of course, based on anecdotal evidence, I discovered that cases that we had more, I focused my research in Nigeria. So the studies I saw on news or stories read on newspapers were basically of vulnerable adults, very few cases of minors, which is basically what the bishops confirmed. We have more cases of vulnerable adults rather than cases of minors in Nigeria. So I believe it will also be same in other countries in Africa. So of course, 2 major reasons limit explain why we don't have any reports, nationwide report done in any church in Africa. The peculiarities above, and then we have poor documentation. So if you reach to a diocese to ask them, because there is poor documentation, no cases are recorded. Even if cases are recorded, because they are poorly documented, doing that research is going to be difficult because you need to have the cases in the diocesan archives before you can actually have a research that you can present. So the cases are missing in many diocesan archives because of documentation that we have. So overview of the canonical delicts. So like I said, Canon 1398 is penal law, and it is restrictive only. It's restrictive if you focus on that as when we're talking about social abuse. So the 2021 revision of the penal norms modified the former Canon 1392. When I was writing my project, it was in the peak of the revision. So the topic I chose was based on Canon 1392, paragraph 2. And immediately the penal code was reviewed. I changed it. And first SSC came out. I had to change. I kept on changing my work from time to time. Father Doyo here is here. So he knew when I was changing. I said I was waiting so that let me know the Pope's next move before I can finish my work, so that I don't just finish my work immediately and the following day any document comes out and undermines all the whole work I've done. So I was waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. So the canon has been modified. So apart from Canon 1398, sorry, which the previous one, the current one now, okay, let me put it this way. Canon 1392 was modified, and now Canon paragraph 3 has been added in addition to Canon 1398. So we also have Sacramentum Sanctitatis Tutela, which provided the case for more grave delicts, of which Article 6 talks about sexual abuse of minors perpetrated by clerics, and for minors and those who habitually have the imperfect use of freezing. So the document SST, which is must be known whenever one is considering this, also talks about the competence of the dicastery for the doctrine of faith on who are competent to judge this delict. So another document as well is As a Loving Mother of Pope Francis in 2016, which first introduced the term vulnerable adults. So these documents now added negligence on the part of the person who is in charge of a particular church for not dealing with cases of sexual abuse. And of course, we have Vox Exlis Lus Mundi. So we have several documents, which is why I titled this place An Overview of the Canonical Delicts, no longer Canon 1398. So, as part of the overview, so we have to look at the victims before we now go to what constitutes sexual abuse in the church. So victims are 4 categories. 1, minor, of course, 1 below the age of 18. Number 2, 1 who habitually has an imperfect use of freezing. And then 3, vulnerable adults, which Vos Exis Lus Mundi defines as any person in a state of infirmity, physical or mental deficiency, or deprivation of personal liberty, which in fact, even occasionally limits the ability to understand or to want or otherwise to resist the offense. So recently, in January 30th of this year, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith clarified that they do not judge cases of sexual abuse when the victim is a vulnerable adult. They are restricted to minors and to those who habitually have the imperfect use of freezing. So there are 2 categories. 1, to whom the law recognizes equal protection, and vulnerable adults are beyond their competence. Of course, you know that the DDF is responsible once it concerns clerics. So I categorize the vulnerable adults into 2. 1 is vulnerable ecclesiastics. Here I mean those in sacred orders, religious vows, the laity who occupy an ecclesiastical office, and those aspiring to the priesthood or religious life. The popular case of Cardinal Macari in the United States, he abused seminarians. So these persons were vulnerable because they were aspiring to the priesthood, and it was difficult for them to resist their bishop who attempted an abuse over them. So the second category is vulnerable laity. So here I mean the Christ faithful, those who seek prayers, come to church, seek for sacraments, spiritual direction, attend catechism, serve at mass, belong to lay associations, or have moments of encounter with clerics, religious, or laity who occupy an ecclesiastical office. I have to state here that the church's involvement in sexual abuse does not concern every Catholic. It concerns clerics by their nature who are responsible in the church, religious, and then the laity who occupies an ecclesiastical office or who enjoys a dignity or a function, as you see in Canon 1398, paragraph 2. So a person who just comes to church without performing any function, if the person commits an abuse, is beyond the competence of the church, because the person is not actually enjoying a dignity or occupying a function in the church. The church gets involved only when the laity is involved. That's when it's now church issue. The 4th category, 1 to whom the law recognizes equal protection. We know that vulnerable adults, even though it's in Vos Exis Lus Mundi, which was first issued in 2019, and then the revised penal code came out in 2021. But the new code did not add vulnerable adults in the code. And they gave the reason for it because vulnerable adults represents a notion that is not yet well defined or doctrinally shared in the broad ambit in which the canon law is enforced. Because we know that canon law is for the universal church, which involves Muslim countries in the Muslim world, and countries where Hinduism or Buddhism is the prevalent religion. So the church is very careful to use terms that will now create problem for people in those countries to interpret them, because who is considered a vulnerable adult in Africa might not be a vulnerable adult in the West. So here in Nigeria, for instance, greeting a woman, you sort like do a side embrace. That is our culture. So that's normal. Even if you just be there, the woman just come for you to embrace by the side. In another culture, the woman stretches out her hand for you to shake her. So if you say vulnerable adult, so if I shake someone in Nigeria, there's no problem. If I hug by the side, there's no problem. If I do it outside of the African culture, it becomes a problem. That's encroaching in someone's space. So these little issues are why the church is careful in using those terms, using the term vulnerable adults, incorporating the term vulnerable adult in the code of canon law. So they now added a third term, those to whom the law recognizes equal protection. So this is a term, a formulation broad enough to include the various forms of weakness and fragility of the victim. So we see this in the Dicastery for Legislative Text. There's a document that they released to assist in the understanding of the new penal code. So it's interesting for us to know some countries in Africa, 18 is not the age of majority. So Eswatini, former Swaziland, and Madagascar, the age of majority is 21. In other countries, the age of majority is 18. So if sexual abuse happens with someone 19 years in Madagascar or Eswatini, is not the person is still a minor. So there are discrepancies in the church, discrepancies in various countries, which is why the church is very careful to use terms. So this new term, one to whom the law recognizes equal protection, provides the legal framework that accommodates diverse legal systems around the world, which I just explained now. And then it also accommodates the various instances where the code specifies the care and protection of people entrusted to those occupying ecclesiastical office. So instead of going to seek, as I argued in my project, instead of going to seek who is vulnerable, we'll swap roles. Someone is under my care as a priest. Why should I attempt a sexual act over her? So this is what this does. So somebody is coming to me as a priest for spiritual direction. She requires protection. So if I do something to her, then I've abused her. So it's no longer whether she's a vulnerable adult or not, which could include people like those that have Down syndrome because they are over 18, but of course they still perpetually have the imperfections of reason. And then you can talk about those for certain situations are unable to make judgments. So vulnerable adults involve those who have perfections of reason, but at the moment they don't have it. So it's different from the one who habitually has that. So vulnerable adult, the person is okay, but in this situation he was vulnerable maybe because he needed money or because he was intoxicated or whatever it is. So he was vulnerable at that situation. But the church's emphasis now, as you can see here, to accommodate every situation, one to whom the law recognizes equal protection. So overview of the canonical delicts. B, the delict itself. So a sexual act becomes an abuse only when the perpetrator engages in the act with any of the victims described above or forces the victim to do so. I will explain more on forcing the victim to do so. So Canon 1398. So if sexual activity happens between someone who is not any of these victims, then it's not a sexual abuse. But if a priest has a sexual activity with someone and the priest is arguing that it is consensual, the question is, if that person requires equal protection, maybe the person comes for catechism, then it's an abuse. It doesn't matter if it was consensual. The person coming to us as priests is coming because the person believes that we can provide protection while discharging our services as priests. So Canon 1398 legislates on pornography, and grooming and inducement aim to make the victim submit oneself to pornography or partake in pornographic exhibitions, whether real or simulated. So the tech, I wrote here, tech is relevant. So it doesn't matter the manner in which pornography was done or the modality, whether it was paper or through technological means, is irrelevant. Pornography is pornography. Of course, I'm talking here about child pornography or pornography also of victims of vulnerable people as well. So the law says, Canon 1398 says, immorally acquires, retains, exhibits pornographic images. So acquires, and what is acquiring that? What is acquiring a pornographic image and abuse? Acquiring a pornographic image means that someone has already been abused somewhere, and sexual abuse is an offense around the world. So if one acquires a pornographic image of a minor, it means that an offense has been committed somewhere. So somebody, by buying it, the person is supporting the continuous abuse of minors in another place. So retains, why should I keep it with myself? What am I doing with it if I don't enjoy it? Exhibits, presenting it whether for myself or for people or to further induce other people into it. And then, so distributes as well is also another reason for part of what Canon 1398 says. Then, like I said previously, the delict goes beyond 1398. So we have here Canon 1395, paragraph 3. So which says a cleric who by force, threats, or abuse of his authority commits an offense against the sixth commandment of the Decalogue or forces someone to perform or submit to sexual acts is to be punished. So 3 criteria here: force, which is vis, threats, mine, and then abuse of authority. So once sexual abuse is perpetrated by force, whether physical or psychological, physical is like rape, psychological is by trying to talk the person into it, try to use a psychological weapon to manipulate the person to be able to abuse the person. And then abuse of authority, if based on my authority, I give the person fears because I use my authority to be able to have my way with another person. That's an abuse. So like we have the Rotary students. So sexual offense is perpetrated cum vi et minis. So force comes, and then the abuser comes with a force, vis, and then the victim succumbs out of fear. So that's why the two have to go together. V minis constitutes abuse because it contravenes natural law. And of course, which guarantees the fundamental and inalienable right to choose one's action freely. So except in cases where acts are intrinsically evil, penal law eliminates imputability for those who violate a law under physical force. So just to justify that when someone was coerced forcefully or psychologically, that the person, except the case is intrinsically evil, the person is not, the offense is not imputable on the person. And then we have Canon 1395 paragraph 3 and 1398 paragraph 2. So which identify 2 ways which a cleric or a religious or a lay person commits the sexual abuse through force, threats, and abuse of authority. So they commit, if they adopt any of these 3 criteria above, force, threats, and abuse of authority to gratify themselves. And then secondly, if they help people to be able to do that. So someone can provide the favorable condition for which another person can be abused. The person is still complicit in that act. So that's for sexual abuse. So I quickly go to safeguarding, which is the other part. Like I said, the work is in 2 parts. So safeguarding. So care for victims in the church took a different dimension. The church has always been seeking to care for victims, but it took a new dimension with when Pope Francis established the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors in 2014 to study current programs on child protection and formulate ways to help. So even in the church's documents, we can see the change from protection to safeguarding. So when Pope Francis established the commission in 2014, the word there, the aim of the commission, as you can see on the slide, the aim of the commission is, he says that the aim of the commission is to promote the protection of the dignity of minors and vulnerable adults. Then in 2022, with the reform of the Apostolic Constitution on the reform of the Curia, Roman Curia, Predicate Evangelium, which now established this Pontifical Commission within the Dicastery for Doctrine of Faith. The Pope Francis changed the word from protection to safeguarding. So in Article 78, we now see that as well as proposing the appropriate measures for safeguarding minors and vulnerable adults. So previously it was protection of the dignity of minors and vulnerable adults. Now it's now safeguarding minors and vulnerable adults. So the focus of the church is on safeguarding. This change is very, very important because the church is no longer focusing on dealing with those who have been abused. We are not stopping there, but we are now being proactive instead of being reactive. We are now being proactive to ensure that nobody is in harm's way, putting measures in place. So the term safeguarding the church now includes protecting sexual abuse victims, punishing the perpetrator, and putting measures in place to prevent victims from harm. So what is the church doing towards safeguarding victims of sexual abuse? So one, institution of offices, establishment of institutions or offices to submit reports of abuse. So when Vos Essis Mundi was established in 2019, Pope Francis said that every diocese must establish within a year and a one or more public, stable, and easily accessible system for submitting reports. So when VEM was, so VEM means Vos Essis Mundi for those who are on mobile. So when it was revised in 2023, sorry, so the Pope also emphasized it again, but no longer must be established within a year. So what is the church in Africa doing regarding safeguarding? With the instruction of the Pope in 2019, every diocese in Africa has established one or more public, stable, and easily accessible system based on the instruction of the Pope. So it could be an institution or ecclesiastical office. So even if we didn't see it in the directory, because you might check your diocesan directory and you will not see anything there, it also still means that these offices are not established. We have a way of doing our things in Africa here. So the office is there. If you report, then they will tell you the person who is involved. But you might not see the name in the directory and you might not see the guidelines in any place. But the offices have been there, have been established in the way and manner in which the diocesan bishop wishes to have them established. So the church in Africa is working on safeguarding by establishing institutes and offices. And every priest has gone through a seminar, and those church personnel has gone through one form of seminar to prepare them to be able to work with children and vulnerable adults. So the second part of the church efforts of the church in Africa is having guidelines. So following Sacramentum Sanctitatis Tutela in 2001 and 2010, Pope John Paul II established in 2001 or issued it in 2001. Pope Benedict XVI modified it in 2010, and Pope Francis also worked on it again in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, or 2022. So following the promulgation in 2001 and 2010, the then Congregation for Doctrine of Faith issued a circular letter to all Episcopal conferences around the world, assisting them to develop guidelines for dealing with cases of abuse. So every Episcopal conference has that. So in the work here, you can see I put norms in brackets. So what you have mainly is guidelines. So guidelines are not normative, because the Episcopal Conference does not have the capacity to issue a norm binding on the members of the Episcopal Conference without a recognitio from the Apostolic See. So what Episcopal Conferences issue are guidelines, and then each diocese is to issue its own norms, which now be its own guidelines or norms if they decide, which will now have a binding force within the diocese. So what you're going to see around is basically guidelines. Generally, the guidelines, which I stumbled of various guidelines of some countries in Africa, have three purposes: pastoral, assisting the victim, which means to assist the victim in finding healing and reconciliation with the church; disciplinary, which is the procedure for imposing sanctions; and preventive, which means mechanisms to prevent future abuse. So the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors have been working very hard. So they analyze the guidelines of the church of the various churches in Africa, the various countries in Africa. So in their report, 2023, September 2023 reports. So they analyzed 32 out of 54 countries. So interestingly, Nigeria is absent from that. I saw the list of all the countries that they evaluated or they reviewed their guidelines. Nigeria is absent. And so the mere fact that Nigeria is absent means that the report is not comprehensive enough. Because I wrote my work on the church in Nigeria and I used the Nigerian guidelines as well as other documents issued by the church in Nigeria, but Nigeria was not part of the countries reviewed. So it means that it was not comprehensive enough. Based on that too, I can also argue that if 32 out of 54 countries have been reviewed and Nigeria, which I'm very sure has a guideline, is not there, I can say that probably all the countries in Africa have a guideline on safeguarding, which is a plus, showing that the church in Africa is actually working. So in their reports, they discovered 3 trends in the reports of the guidelines that they reviewed. First is the reports were mainly juridical, of course, because of the letter from the Dicastery for Doctrine of Faith. So it was mainly juridical, basically about how to deal with cases. And then many local churches as well are still working on consolidating the offices for easily accessible reports of offenses. Then the third one, that is the relationship between the church and state, which undermines local churches' ability to maintain standards and practices. The relationship between the church and state in Africa varies according to countries. So it depends on the country where you are and how it plays out. The church is still struggling how to deal with these issues, and then whether it's going public or announcing it in what way and what manner, when, how, several things based on each country. Because one living in a hostile country is also careful. Someone living in a hostile country where the government is hostile to the church is also careful in the way it manages information regarding, so that the government does not have more information to be able to come and increase their witch hunt over the church. This does not mean that church does not report, but the peculiarities of each country varies in the way they handle sexual abuse. But what matters is that everyone has a guideline and everyone is working towards providing the legal framework for handling cases of abuse. So the Pontifical Commission recommended that the documents need to expand in areas of prevention, victims outreach, and training to foster a robust model for outreach and assistance, and assisting dioceses to promote proactive response. The next slide, I'm ending soon. Sorry. So the Pontifical Commission is already working. So they established through the Memorare Initiative, which they launched in 2023. So they are assisting the churches in the Global South, which basically all the churches in Africa belong to in accompanying victims and survivors, implementing prevention policies, and having appropriate and timely response. So the Commission has already begun working seriously. So in April 2023, they signed a memorandum of understanding with the first section for first evangelization and in particular churches of the Dicastery for Evangelization, which is where all African countries belong to. So to help these churches, the churches in Africa, in managing this. So we also have, they also signed a memorandum of understanding with the church in Rwanda, the Central African Republic, the Episcopal Conference of Eastern Africa, and the Ecclesiastical Province of Mombasa, Kenya. So they are already working. So then they also supported with money, they also supported with money, they allocated 230,000 euros to support safeguarding projects in developing countries around the world. So they are working. The fourth effort, still on the third, obligation to report. So apart from cases, one learns in the Canon Forum, this involves priests, clerics and members and religious are to report cases that have well-founded motives to believe. Well-founded motives to believe is important because you have to be sure that this thing is true, so that you don't just go and report something that is not true about someone. So you must have well-founded motives that this thing has happened. And of course, clerics, what they hear in confession, they are incapable because of the confessional seal. So if a cleric is unsure of where he got the information, he should act tutoristically, which means he should choose, which means that he should follow the safer course, or one that is in agreement with the law to exempt themselves. So if you are not sure, so as not to contravene, violate the sacramental seal, then he needs to pull back if he's not sure, to exempt himself from reporting. Then civil officials, physicians, midwives, advocates, notaries, and others bound by professional secrecy are no longer exempt. They have to report. Reporting no longer violates office confidentiality. So those who fear that from their own testimony, ill repute, dangerous hardships, or other grave ills will befall them, their spouses or persons related to them by consanguinity or affinity are not exempt, except in cases of calumnious denunciation. Of course, the code provides that anyone who neglects to report an offense when required by canonical law is to be punished, but this exempts priests from what they hear in the confessional because of the confessional seal. So the obligation to report is reflected in various documents in the church, in diocese in Africa. However, the respect for priests and the church, protection of family honor, fear of stigma, the spirituality of forgiveness, the judiciary system, threat to marriage, continue to prevent people from reporting cases. So this, at this time around, it's not that the church is not acting, but people are not bringing cases forth. People are not reporting cases first. You cannot act on what you don't have. So it's a challenge with the church in Africa faces. The second dimension of reporting is, the first one is obligation to report. So now the obligation to act on the reports. So the church requires that requires that people who receive reports must report. So that if failure to report is cover up, and cover up is an offense, which is complicit, as we have in Vos Esses Lus Mundi, Article 1b. So Pope Francis added negligence to report as one of the offenses for which one can be removed from ecclesiastical office, negligence to report an offense. Then those who fail to report, of course, the code stipulates penalties for those who abuse ecclesiastical offices and those who, through culpable negligence, unlawfully and without harm, perform or omit an act of ecclesiastical power. So, report to civil authorities. The church in Africa is also reporting to the civil authorities. So I put some quotations here to show us what various churches in Africa are doing. So in the various guidelines that I studied while preparing for this paper, it was clear that they say report to the authorities. So the church in Nigeria, Bishop Conference of Nigeria says, depending upon the nature of the allegation and the status of the law, allegations of sexual abuse may be turned to the proper civil authorities. The Ghana Bishops Conference recommends reporting an abuse to the state official. The Kenyan Bishops Conference requires the child protection officer to, quote, report all child protection concerns received to the civil authorities after consultation with the assistant designated person. Then the Southern African Bishops Conference requires that, quotation, all allegations and suspicions of abuse are reported within the church as well as to civil authorities as required by law. So the fourth part of the church's effort in the church in Africa is preventing sexual abuse. So it's now an integral part. Safeguarding is now an integral part, and is centered around three areas: formation, organizational and administrative structure, and background checks. So formation of future clerics, I'm in the seminary here, so is also one of the things that we emphasize here, and programs to help priests grow and develop effective maturity so that they can be able to work with minors and vulnerable adults. Then there is also discussion among clerics in Africa, which is now in place in where healing ministries. So people are now encouraged to anoint only on the recommended places of anointing, because if you anoint in erogenous places, you can be accused of abuse. So the church law provides anointing on the forehead, on the palm, or recommended places. Those places need to be followed to avoid accusations of abuse. Then the second part is the organizational and administrative structure. So there are offices already, as I said, established in various dioceses, and there are some policy manuals many have, but many do not have, creating an awareness about this. Then the third, so regarding this, there is some policy manuals. In my research for the church in Nigeria, half of the dioceses at that time do not have a policy manual of their own. They use that of the Bishops Conference of Nigeria. The challenge with not having a policy, there is some policy manual, is that it does not, there is no quick reference point to where one is to report, to the location of the office, to who is responsible. That of the national is always generic, what you need to do. But the some policy manual is very important because it has the address, the office, the phone number, who to report, where to do, how, what are the various procedures to follow. But when it's not there, it becomes difficult for the people within that particular region. And like in Nigeria, for instance, that is heterogeneous. There is some policy manual in the southeast where I stay, where Islamic law is not rife, is not existing, is different from northern Nigeria, where Islamic law exists. So the policy manual for the Diocese of Katsina is going to be different from the policy manual from Diocese of Owerri or Kigwe, because in Katsina, Islamic law is there, and a girl of 50 years can get married. So if I'm a girl of 50 years and my classmate of 50 years is already married as a third wife, I might not see what has happened to me as an abuse as a 15-year-old girl, because my classmate is already married with a child. So why should I see it as an abuse? So these are why there are some policies that represent, recognize, and accommodate the peculiarities of that particular area are necessary. Then the third one is background checks. So schools now and churches and their background checks to ensure that anyone coming to work as a teacher in the school or to occupy, perform a function in church, teach catechism, enjoy any dignity or whatever it is evaluated. There are some background checks to show that the person is not a potential abuser. And then, of course, there's a growing trend to have meet in public spaces so that no one can accuse you of abuse within a closed space. So you meet people outside, or when somebody can easily bump in and check, so that and come out later on and say that you abused him or her. So in all, the church in Africa is creating a safe environment for minors and vulnerable adults. So my conclusion is just simple. The church, the whole essence for reforms of penal law regarding sexual abuse is to deal with accusations of cover-up of cases, long delays in prosecution, leniency in punishing perpetrators, apparent disinterest in the pain and trauma of victims, and overall complicity as long as it safeguards the reputation of the priesthood and of the church. This is no longer the case now. The church is now interested, proactive towards safeguarding. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father. You have really done justice to the topic. We appreciate this, your wonderful presentation. And before we go to the next section, that is question and answer, I just want to highlight some of the important points that Father presented in the course of his presentation. Father began by telling us some of the peculiarities of the African society, that make the case of sexual abuse different from other societies. And one of the things he mentioned is the patriarchy and the status of the child. He also talked about fear of stigma and the threats to marriage, and concluded with the points of what he called the breakdown of communal living and the influence of the media. Father went forward to give us some definitions of some terms used in penal law with regards to sexual abuse. One of them is minor. Who is a minor? A minor, there are two definitions or two components of the definition of a minor in penal law. One is that a minor is one who is below the age of 18. And again, a person that habitually has an imperfect use of reason. That is someone that is incapable of personal responsibility, is also described as a minor in accordance with Canon 99. Then the expression of vulnerable adults. Father told us that the church presently is careful in using this term vulnerable adults. Rather, it prefers to use the term as we have in Canon 1398, the expression which says that one to whom the law requires equal protection. And this formulation is broad enough to include the various forms of weaknesses and fragility of the victim. That for me is an important point. Now, Father told us that there are three criteria that can make sexual abuse that can make a sexual act to be regarded as an abuse. One of them is force, when there is force. And the second one is threat, while the third one is the abuse of authority. The last part of the presentation was focused on safeguarding victims of sexual abuse in the church in Africa. Under this, some points were highlighted. The first point is that in the church presently, there is an institution to submit reports of sexual abuse. The church is not focusing more on those that have been abused, who abused, what's happened in the past, but the church is also putting measures in place to prevent the future occurrence of sexual abuse. One is having the institution of, submitting the report of sexual abuse. Second one is having guidelines for handling sexual abuse. The third one is the obligation to report. And the obligation to report is also connected with the obligation to act. There has been this issue that in many places, the bishops seem not to act when there is this case of reporting. Pope Francis made it clear in the document Vos Estis Lus Mundi that a bishop who is negligent in his office, who is not carrying out what is expected of him in case of acting in terms of sexual abuse, can be removed from office. And that's a very important point to note as we talk about canonical law, penal law. Then the last point is preventing future sexual abuse. One of the ways to do that, Father talked about forming seminarians to develop in affective maturity. That is an important point. Once again, Father, we appreciate you for the wonderful presentation. It's now time for question, contribution, and comments. Father, you can remove your slides, please.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to make an intervention, you want to ask a question, please indicate by raising your hand. I will give you the opportunity to speak. Okay, go ahead, Nikele.
Hi, greetings, everyone. So excellent presentation. I have quite a few points, but there's one item I wanted to provide a statement and another a question. So first, I like that the language was changed to safeguarding because everyone should feel that when they come to worship, it is a safe space, especially when they're in the presence of spiritual leadership. And so it shows that the church is on the offensive instead of the defensive. And also it indicates that the situation is being taken seriously. Very often, some people take things seriously after something happens. So to show that they're taking things seriously from the beginning, I think it creates a safe space. And I think it also gives people peace that they will be taken seriously. But a question that I have when you talked about the spirituality of forgiveness, I wanted to ask that when people are being counseled, when they report these incidents, are they also taught that while we are required to forgive, is it also emphasized that with forgiveness, that does not mean that there should be an absence of accountability?
Rector, go ahead and respond.
Okay, I can respond. Okay. Yeah, of
Yes.
course, forgiveness does not mean the absence of accountability. So the issue here is reporting from the first instance. Once cases are reported, of course, the aim of penal law in the church is to correct the offender, repair scandal, and then help the situation. So once someone reports a case, then the church is bound to take it up. The issue of spirituality of forgiveness is that people do not want to report on their own. And that is beyond what the church can do. You cannot tell somebody who does not want to report because you must know that something has already happened before you can know how to help the person. So once there is reports, forgiveness does not mean justice does not mean mercy does not mean there is no justice. So justice requires that the victim has been abused and the victim requires care, and scandal has happened, and the scandal needs to be taken care of. So once a case is reported, forgiveness does not come in this context because the law must take its course. The question remains, will people come on their own to report?
Yes, I just wanted to add to that. Yes, I just wanted to know that when victims report it, they're thinking that they don't want to report their own, because sometimes people feel that they don't want to create an issue or create some type of embarrassment. But so I just wondered that when people are counseled about this, is it emphasized that yes, while they do have to forgive, they also have to think about themselves, and that there should be zero tolerance for being abused, and therefore that while they must forgive, it is also right to hold people accountable.
Yes, there's a zero tolerance for it. So if people come, if someone comes to you to report to you about this, you have to encourage the person to go and report. So not doing so is already a penalty, which I mentioned in the work. So there is a penalty for not reporting an offense that one hears. The person now becomes complicit in the offense or trying to cover it up, but the church uses the word complicit, which makes it an offense.
Okay, Blessing, unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Sure,
I can hear
go
you.
ahead.
Yes,
Thank you very much, Father, for that brilliant and honest presentation. I just want to confirm that it's true, the churches in Africa that are doing something, particularly in the schools. I worked in primary school, and the workshops were done for the teachers, and I was shocked somehow that even in primary schools, the culture of silence is there. So when you made mention of it, and I said yes, for me, first of all, the breakthrough have to begin from people should be encouraged to tell their story correctly, rightly, to the right persons and to the right places. Breaking the culture of silence, workshop, encouragement, and right beginning from home. It's true, our culture has affected us in that area, and from few experience I've had, I've seen where the child want to talk, the teacher did me so, the mother will say, hey, don't talk. So I create that forum for the children that you can come to my office and say any other thing, anything you want to say to me, feel free and come and tell me. And that has also really helped from what some of the children came and shared. And with wisdom, I'm able to follow it to make sure that the children get justice. I wanted to say thank you. And how can we improve on this culture of silence that have crippled us, particularly in Nigeria? Don't talk, oh. Please don't talk, oh. Don't talk. Whatever reason, as you mentioned, is a big hindrance. How do we consciously break this culture of silence in schools and at home? Thank you.
Thank you, Blessing. As a church, we are committed towards salvation of souls, and also, which the way I look at it, holistic salvation of souls, which involves the temporal care and the spiritual care of people as much as possible. So the church is obliged to assist people. It's difficult to go beyond what is common in the society. You are doing well by actually telling people to be open, to say. But even in the current, let's use Nigeria, which I'm familiar with now. Look at what is going on. You say your mind, government comes and picks you up. You report something and you are witch hunt. Your life is even at risk for trying to say something that is true. So there is the environment encourages it. Is beyond what the church can do. I can say, I can preach, report. Say, they will tell you, Father, if they come for me, will you be there?
Yes.
Will you be there? So that the culture goes beyond what the church can do. On our own part, we are morally and legally obliged to encourage people to report. And the church has done that. Yeah. And the church in Africa is doing that. Yes. But what people can do on their own part, unfortunately and sadly, is beyond what we can do. So we can be doing little as you're saying now. That's what everybody's doing. Reports. But you will force the person to come to the office now.
And also, apart from reporting, as I said, we can create awareness to the children The children should be told preventive, how they can save themselves, how they can, if you sense a danger, you come home, you self-defense in a way. The children should also be taught that too. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Father Mike, unmute yourself, Father Mike.
Okay, thank you so much, Father. I wish to begin by appreciating our paper presenter, Father Chidebere Obiodu, for a work well done. I'm also so much elected for the clarification he made, because I've often asked, why is the term vulnerable adults or adults not accommodated in the Canon 1398? There you see minors. So I'm happy to have the clarification for Father. My question is a direct question. When someone is of maybe a delete, a crime against minors, abuse of minors, and after a series of investigation, objective, canonical, judicial investigations which were made, and it was discovered that this priest or religious or a seminarian or a laity who was accused of performing an abuse, it was discovered that this person is innocent. And we want to know what the church is doing more. What is the church doing to restore the damaged reputation? You know what Canon 128 says about damages, someone can ask for reparation of damage for his good name, according to Canon 220. So what is the church doing more for victims who are innocent and they were wrongly accused? What is the church doing more to restore their already damaged reputations? Let me give you an example. Someone may be wrongly accused of abusing a minor, and after the investigation, it turns out that the person is innocent. Yes, he could apologize to the person, but there are certain we say reputations that are damaged that follows one through life. There are certain reputations that will even affect your normal relationship with people again, because that impression that this person has abused someone, even after the declaration that the person is innocent. How can the church address such a situation? Thank you so much.
Thank you. In my work, not this work, in my doctorate thesis, I dedicated a subsection to care for victims of false accusation, because there are so many of them. Because I bought a book actually that described in detail cases of priests who are falsely accused in the United States. So it's quite something existing, and it's also existing in our place. So I do not know what is being done, because I am not involved in the safeguarding office of the diocese where I live. So, but what the church should do is to, first of all, send the priest needs psychological help. So the church needs to ensure that the priest gets psychological help. And then any other way to rehabilitate the priest, anything to do to rehabilitate the priest should be done. The church does not have the means to begin to punish the person who falsely accused. So there's nothing you can do much there, but to take care of the priest, and then be cautious. The church should be cautious next time when cases come. We don't just quickly go, we take time. So what we have now is, when cases are reported, I presume deep investigation is being done before the case is brought up. Because once you begin to work on something that is not well founded, there is a likelihood that it will be false. So 2 ways now: rehabilitate through providing care as much as possible. You cannot wipe off the dent and the stigma the person bears. And then the bishop could also help the person by, apart from psychological help, but also giving the person some roles, or whatever it is, or actually coming out to say publicly that this thing was false accusation. So in one way or the other, to ensure that the person's name is cleared, not completely, because it cannot be cleared completely, but at least there is some form of public declaration that this thing was not true. And then the person is reinstated into the office that he lost through precautionary measure. And then, of course, be cautious and delay a bit, not to work on the case, but do more investigation at the preliminary level before cases, or the preliminary investigation. because you talk about Canon 1717, preliminary investigation, but it's when the ordinary has very similar. That's when something is similar. That similitude of truth that the ordinary begins an investigation. So in my work, my project, I talked about preliminary. So before the preliminary investigation, that one that needs to be done by the office for safeguarding, because the office for safeguarding will get the report before they will now take it to the ordinary, who will now activate the preliminary investigation. So at the level of preliminary investigation, the judge needs to dig deeper to ensure that there is some similitude in this before pushing it to the next level. And that's why it's a committee. It's not one person affair. It's a committee that could involve canonists, psychologists, even medical doctors, because it could lead to cases of physical examination of the body of the victim in case there was involved, it is accusation of penetration in the sexual abuse. I don't know if I answered your question, Father.
Yeah, thank you so much. You answered so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. We now take the last question for this conference. That's Vivian Anokanti. Vivian, unmute yourself.
Yes, very well, Father. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to first of all thank the presenter and congratulate him for a well-researched presentation. They are quite impressive. Mine is rather a concern with respect to what we do with sentiment, or if you like, sentimental inclination over the law. You know, we're talking about how to ensure that we safeguard, the rights of these ones and protect them from abuses and all of that. But then an issue occurs and it's reported and you hear things like, oh, leave him now. Is it just because of this little thing? Oh, why don't we just, let this die off and so on? And then you get to some points, you see that the person who is involved is maybe a godson of the bishop or a godson of a goddaughter of someone who is high up there. And then constituting a committee to investigate on that matter becomes an issue. So people tend to put in sentiments first over the law. So when we begin to put in sentiments over the law, we'll discover that we go nowhere. But at the point we begin to call a spade, irrespective of who is involved, then we'll begin to get somewhere. So I think rather that the church needs a reorientation, if you like, an ongoing enlightenment, to let people know that the Lord says this, do not do this, do that, because if you do it, no matter who is involved, the person will be taken up and the law must take its course. So I want to like to ask the presenter, he may not have the answer, he may have. What is the church doing to follow suit? It's not just about the law. We need a continuous enlightenment, a reorientation on our people to realize that these laws are not just written down for the papers. They are also to be actualized so that we are able to rid ourselves of this in order to achieve justice.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question, Vivian. Father, do you have something to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree with her. It's not about the documents, but not sentiments over the law. We need to follow it the way it is. When I during my research for my doctorate thesis, I stumbled on a guideline of a diocese, and the structure of that guideline. So this is a negative critique of that guideline. Is of a diocese in Nigeria. I won't mention the diocese. The guideline says that the report should go to the dean, which is the vicar foreign. Report to the vicar foreign. And that's a big problem. It's not, why is it a big problem? What if the dean himself is the one who abused and the report is to come to him? So it's already undermined that document. And then what if somebody was abused in that diocese and the person traveled abroad and you're saying, who is the dean? I don't even know. There's so much confusion there. So I understand I agree fully with what Vivian is saying, that we need to be more proactive. Yes, the law is there. We need to follow it up. Unfortunately, cases of sexual abuse are among the cases where you cannot begin an investigation without knowing the people who are involved in it. That's the biggest problem. If it was, it's not, if you get a blind report, somebody abused me, you can't just begin an investigation. The name of the person must be there. So the human sentiments and human involvement of pandering to certain persons, the church talks that every case should be dealt with. And because I was trying to be fast, I didn't read some of the places that the Pope Francis was saying that everything must be treated. So the challenge is things are beyond our capacity. We do what we need to do as a church, and we are doing what we need to do as a church. But what the part on the part of the people is a problem, and we are not done completely. I must admit that as well. Like I just told you about this guideline, is a problem. This is for the diocese that has a guideline. There are dioceses that do not even have a guideline. So it becomes more difficult. So I don't have the forum to say, but we keep on encouraging. I believe that dioceses have protocols and have put measures in place. The guidelines should be on the diocesan website. So that's a way of continuing continue to promote this. And then whenever issues come up, or at schools, children are told, if any teacher does anything to you, or even the principal, if he's a school priest managed by a priest or a religious, does anything to you, report. So these things are there. It's just a little bit complex because of the African situation. That's a big challenge we are facing here.
Okay, thank you so much, Father. We now conclude our conference. I invite Reverend Father Peter
Excuse me, Father.
to give.
I saw some message. People are saying that they want the presentation. I don't know. I have it in the article form. I have the article form. I also have the PowerPoint forms. I don't know.
Yeah, Father, what we do, please, participants, if you are interested in getting a copy of this presentation, please send your email address on the chat now. Father will send it to me while I forward it to you. Send your WhatsApp number and your email address, okay, on the chat. I will get it and send. I'm going to send two things to you. One, the presentation from Father, and the record of this conference. This conference is being recorded, so I will send it to you after editing it. Please send your WhatsApp number and your email address that you may get it. Thank you. I now invite Father Peter Omedi to give us votes of thanks.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Father Tedeus. Thank you, Father, for the good work you've done. Actually, we are grateful to you all for participating, but in a special way, we thank God Almighty for making this conference a reality. When Father Tadeus brought up the idea and we all concurred, we didn't expect this type of attendance, but we thank God for everything. In a very special way, we thank you, our speaker today, Reverend Father Chidebere Obiodu, for the exciting, inspiring, clear, and distinct presentation. Actually, the issue of sexual abuse of minor and vulnerable adults has been a very burning issue in different walks of life in the society, including the church. But you were able to do justice to that topic by your wonderful presentation. We are grateful to you. Thank you, and God bless you. And also to all our participants, we are so much grateful to you all for making out time to be with us. May God protect and bless you all. As we remember that the best way to show our appreciation and gratitude is not just to listen or to utter the words, but to live by them. All that we have learned this evening through this presentation, may we try to, in one way or the other, in our different ways that we can, in our capacity, put it in action. Let us do that. Let us safeguard and protect and encourage others to do so. Because in the church, there is zero tolerance for abuse. And for all us Christians, I think we ought to stick to that. I'm grateful to you all. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you, Father Tadeus, for the wonderful moderation. And also thanks to our president for the organization. Thank you, and God bless you all. All right.
This we ask through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah. I now invite the president of the Association of Anglophone African Students of Canon Law, Angelicum, Sister Loretta, to give us a welcome remark.